So what actually causes stretchy seedlings, long leggy plants that just don't look right? Most people assume that stretching is just a part of normal growth, but in reality, it's often a signal that your plant is responding to its environment. But here's the good news. The good news is that stretching is not random. It's driven by plant biology, and once you understand what's happening, it's surprisingly easy to manage. So today, we're going to explore why plants stretch, what causes it, when it's actually beneficial, and how to create an environment that encourages stronger, more compact growth. So let's just go ahead and dive right in. So first off, what actually is plant stretch? Well, plant stretch refers to the rapid elongation of the stem between nodes, the point where the leaves and the branches develop. Instead of growing outward with short compact spacing, the plant invests its energy into growing taller. This process is completely normal. The plants are not making a mistake here, but rather they're responding to environmental signals that they've evolved to recognize over millions of years. And in nature, stretching can actually be a survival strategy. When a really young plant senses competition from surrounding vegetation, its priority changes from producing leaves to reaching more sunlight as quickly as possible. Think about it as having tons of plants in the forest, on the forest floor. When those forest floor plants are not able to get light, they prioritize stretchiness so that they can actually search out that light. And as with all plants, that response is built into the plant's biology. Even indoors, the same survival mechanisms are still at work. Now let's dig into a little bit of the science behind plant stretching, because there's a lot of it. Now, plants don't have eyes, but they're constantly monitoring the quality, intensity, and duration of the light around them. Inside these little plant cells, there are specialized light-sensitive pigments that actually detect changes in the light spectrum. One of the most important systems involved is the phytochrome system. It's a little bit of a mouthful, the phytochrome system. Without getting too technical, phytochromes help plants determine whether they're growing in open sunlight or beneath the shade of other plants, whether they're getting direct sunlight or they're being crowded out. And in most of those situations, if a plant is really short and it's not getting enough light, it detects conditions that resemble shade. And when it does that, it actually activates what's known as the shade avoidance response. So instead of investing its energy into producing thicker stems, sort of like this one is doing right here, which is getting a perfect amount of light, instead it produces longer plants. It focuses on elongation. And instead of investing some of that energy into producing some of those bigger leaves, it focuses on longer stems. So in simple terms, the plant is trying to outgrow the competition, simply in terms of height. And that pretty much explains why two plants receiving the same amount of water and nutrients can literally grow so differently depending on their environment. Now, a lot of you guys tend to say, well, Matt, if your plants are stretching, just turn your light source up, turn the brightness up on your lights, bring the lights closer down to your plants, and that may be a useful way to go about things. But in reality, there are a lot of other ways and a lot of other factors that come into stretching. And as a lot of you guys know, there isn't only one cause of stretching. Usually it's a combination of several different environmental factors. The first is, of course, insufficient light intensity. And that's why most people will say, turn the brightness up just a little bit. But you got to be careful. You do not want to burn your plants. Light burn is a real thing. But that said, if the light levels are too low, the plants often respond by extending their stems in an attempt to get more light. That's especially true for indoor grows. Now, the second factor is actually the distance between the light source and the plant. So that's why a lot of folks will also say, bring your lights a little bit lower down to your plant's canopy, and that way you can maximize your light coverage without having to increase your brightness. You don't have to crank it up a whole lot and use a whole lot more electricity. So even a small adjustment in your fixture height can sometimes make a surprisingly large difference. Now, another big factor, guys, is temperature. Temperature can also influence your plant stretching. Warm conditions usually tend to encourage faster stem expansion, especially if that light intensity is not keeping up pace. And another factor is also just plant spacing. If you have tons of plants rammed into your tent, you may notice situations where you can have a little bit more stretching because there's a lot more competition in that tent for light. So essentially, if you have tons of plants crammed into a little 2x4 tent, you may notice a little bit more stretching as some of those plants are really trying to get as much light as they can and crowd out the the other ones. Now, one of the perfect examples, guys, is genetics, and that's a big factor because these two plants right here are under the exact same nutrient schedule, in the exact same medium, under the exact same light source, at the exact same height, but the genetics are completely different. And as you guys can see, this is a runts-heavy genetic, so it's usually a little bit more stocky, compact, short, tighter internodal stacking. You guys can see the spacing is really short, whereas this one right here is that honey banana, and this one has a lot more internodal spacing, I would say. It really looks like it stretches a lot more. It may be down to the fact that it's more of a hybrid as opposed to a lot of those runts which are indica dominant. Now, that's just pure speculation on my part, but genetics do play a part in the stretchiness of the plant. How far those internodal spaces are, how much internodal spacing and stacking you have. And for me, when I'm actually working on a lot of my genetics that I breed for you guys, check out some of those, we actually work on the perfect internodal spacing. For me, I don't like it to be too tight in terms of the spacing, too short, too compact, because it really affects your yield. And I've found that when you have a slightly more wider internodal spacing, you usually get fatter buds with nicer yield. Now, that's just me. So basically understanding your plant's genetics and natural characteristics will help you understand what's normal and what isn't, because tight internodal spacing on this is completely normal, while a little bit more stretchiness on this is also completely normal. So that said, is plant stretching bad? Well, it's not necessarily always bad, and some stretching, like I said, is completely normal, especially during periods of rapid growth, especially during like the pre-flower stretch. You may notice a lot of stretchiness. Heck, it's called the pre-flower stretch, right? Now, problems can arise when stretching becomes too excessive, and signs of excessive stretching do include things like really long spaces between the nodes. So I mentioned trying to find the perfect internodal spacing. If things become really stretched out, then you may have a little bit of a problem. Super thin stems, that's another one. If the stems are way too thin, then they're simply not able to support the flowers. Plants leaning toward the light source, and your whole plant is just sort of leaning like the Great Tower of Pisa, whatever you call it. That's also another sign. Now, poor structural support, reduced branching. When these things happen, the plant is investing more energy into height rather than building a strong framework. So the goal is to get the perfect mix between stretchy internodal stacking and tight internodal stacking, which provides really strong, robust support. Now, the goal is not to eliminate the stretch entirely. The goal is to encourage balanced growth. You want to get the best of both worlds. And that's why in my breeding projects, I always try to find the perfect internodal spacing. Now, a lot of folks ask, how do I control the stretch? What do I do to actually balance it all off? And fortunately, controlling stretch usually doesn't require expensive equipment. A lot of people just simply use tie downs. Now, if you're like me and you hate tying down plants, poking holes in plant pots and cutting string, then you can use some of these LST clips. These come in really clutch, so much so that I got a bag of them. I use these babies all the time. Now, you got to use the LST clips in conjunction or in partnership with some of the other things that I mentioned, and that includes either reducing your light level, like the height of your light, bringing it closer to your plants, or increasing the brightness using the external dimmers. And by doing that, you can actually do exactly what we've done right here. Throw on an LST clip, and that encourages a little bit more growth in these areas. And what that can do is help you to really dial in the plant stretch and maximize your plant's potential. So if you're really worried about your plant stretchiness, then dial in your lighting, evaluate your lighting, and see what's really going on in there, because the lighting is usually the number one factor. Make sure your plants are receiving appropriate light intensity and that your light fixtures are positioned according to the manufacturer's recommendations. You can always just play with it, bring it down a little bit, take it up a little bit, see what works best for you. Now, next, you do want to create a stable environment. Large fluctuations in temperature can influence growth patterns, so consistency is often more important than chasing perfect lighting numbers. And that's just the reality of it. Always be consistent. And on top of that, air movement also plays an important role. Get some air oscillation in there. We do have oscillating fans in here, and those are a really great way for you guys to make sure that your plants are getting exactly what it needs. Gentle, consistent airflow encourages plants to strengthen their stalks over time. Air movement plays an important role. Think of it as like exercise. When the plants experience some slight movement from that wind and that breeze, they gradually become thicker and stronger. Proper spacing between the plants is another simple but effective improvement. Don't stuff a bunch of plants plants into a little small 2x4 tent like I usually tend to do, give them a little bit more space. And in giving them a little bit more space, you'll see some great results. Giving plants enough room helps them to reduce unnecessary competition for light. And finally, avoid making several major changes all at once. Plants respond best to gradual adjustments. Observe how they react over several days before you make more changes. Some folks go in and they change their lights, they change the nutrients, they transplant, they do everything, and that shocks the plants into oblivion. So just be gradual and be consistent and observe things before you make more changes. And always remember, a healthy indoor plant usually displays short, consistent spacing between nodes, strong upright stems, and even leaf development. You look for things like balanced branching, steady growth over time. And remember, plants don't necessarily grow the fastest, they grow efficiently. So look out for the efficient growth rather than the fast growth. Strong structure today often supports better growth tomorrow. And you got to remember, these buds need to be held up in flower. So if your plant stalks are pretty lame, they ain't gonna be able to hold up too much. So stretching is not something to fear, guys. It's simply the plant responding to the environment around it. By understanding the science between light perception, temperature spacing, and airflow, you can work with the plant instead of fighting against it. Small environmental improvements often produce much bigger results than simply buying more equipment. The more you understand how plants think, or at least how they act, how they respond to their surroundings, the better you'll become at helping them reach their full potential. Now, if you enjoyed this video and want more science-based plant explanations that help you become a smarter indoor grower, be sure to subscribe. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys on the next episode. Peace.